Okay, welcome to the next installment of the Enter the Alien series, inspired by the book produced by Philosophy Portal, Enter the Alien. Today, we're going to be discussing Hegelian Tantra with Dimitri Crooijmans, and we are diving into something that's I don't think it's really been explored in the depth that you've explored it, Dimitri. Basically, the relationship between Hegel and Tantra. I think it's a new intersection. So I think this will be a really fascinating conversation. And I think to sort of preface the opening, both your engagement with Hegel and your engagement with Tantra come from a deeply personal space. On the one hand, the Hegelian engagement comes from the Phenomenology of Spirit course, and the Tantric engagement comes from your work with a Tantric organization, which you can introduce and talk about a little bit. But where did you first, I guess my first question will be, how did you first come to Hegel? How did you first come to Tantra? And when did you start to put these two forms of knowledge into a dialogue with each other?
Right, yeah, that's a great question. I came to Hegel because of communism. I was a Marxist, a communist activist, and I wanted to understand dialectical materialism, the foundation of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. So I started reading Lenin, I started reading Stalin, I started reading Mao, uh, but I found that there was a discrepancy between uh, how Marx used the dialectic in his Das Kapital and how especially Stalin and Mao started talking about it, wrote about it. So then I found this weird Slovenian guy on YouTube with all these lectures who sniffs a lot, and I was totally fascinated by him. So I started reading Sublime Object of Ideology. Didn't understand anything about it. Then I started reading it twice. Then I also didn't understand anything about it. Um, Eventually, during the lockdown, we met because we did a meditation group, and then I had this period of retraction that I wanted to get into Hegel and move away from the political scene. Uh, and this is where you were also later that year in the lockdown. You were collaborating with Alexander Bart, and that's where I found podcasts by Technosocial, by Owen Cox and Daniel Frega, and they had these interviews with two tantric teachers of the TNT, the new tantric organization here in the Netherlands, and I was so stunned by the vibe that these people gave off. Timo and Paris, that is. I found them talking about sex very relaxed, very mature. I learned a lot, and it immediately caught my attention. I thought I have to learn more about this. So fast forward to 2022, and you are beginning to do the Hegel course on the Phenomenology of Spirit. I thought, okay, this is the perfect time to really dive deep into the book. And at the same time, I had the occasion to join the TNT workshop, level 1 and 2, which is really the core, I would say, of their teachings. That's where it happens, especially in level 2, the second workshop they organize. And that's kind of how I got introduced to it. Now, after I did the TNT workshop, of course, we had the plan for writing an anthology together. And it just, it kind of came to me. I was doing TNT, I was trying to make sense of, okay, what, um, TNT definitely changed my relationship to sexuality. Not only how I think about it, but very much how I embody it. And Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, as well as your Hegel course, totally changed my relationship to philosophy and to how I think about so many aspects we can get into. So I thought, I basically, out of necessity, I brought those two together, and then I found out that if you actually use the foundation that Alexander Bart and Thomas Hemmelrich, as well as other thinkers have talked about of Tantra, as well as Osho, for example, then it gives you a good starting point to think about the Hegelian Tantra. So that's kind of Yeah, that's how I started.
All right, building on that, let's maybe introduce some core concepts as it relates to Tantra. There may be probably more people who watch my channel who are familiar with Hegelian jargon as opposed to tantric jargon.
Yeah.
So let's maybe start with the divide between sutra and tantra. Describe, how do you understand sutra? How do you understand tantra? And what is their relationship with each other?
Okay, so basically, when you start reading about Tantra, like Timo in the TNT says, every tantric practitioner you ask what is Tantra, they will give you a different answer. So you have to realize this when you're starting to research something like this. The most philosophically rigorous and clear way for me, as well as I think Alexander Barth, as our extended network, to understand these terms is to begin with Freud. So instead of starting with how Tantra has been traditionally developed in traditions like Buddhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, etc., we start with Freud. And Freud wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontents. And this is where he talks about the pleasure principle and the reality principle. Now, very simply, the pleasure principle is the fact that your body wants to enjoy, your body wants to get its pleasure in, whether that's oral, whether that's sexual. And when we are born, we cry for food and we cry for our needs, and they get immediately satisfied. Now, at a certain point in our life, we have to deal with prohibition, the fact that we cannot just live from our bodies, but that we have to deal with the fact that we cannot always get food, that we cannot always just lay in bed whenever we want, and we can't just enjoy our bodies as they come into the world, our drives and instincts. They get infused with language. So language comes with a fundamental prohibition. And the reality principle is what I call proto-sutra. So sutra are means by which we prohibit ourselves from going into our drives and desires, and thus they function for ourselves to spiritually mature. So I always take the example of fasting. When you fast, you prohibit yourself from eating food, and you learn to be with that need of food, which perhaps a lot of eating actually comes from emotional eating. We ate way too much, way much more than we actually need. So this is the pleasure principle trying to make us enjoy ourselves, and sutra makes use of the reality principle to inhibit this, so you can actually overcome addictions. For example, addictions to food. I would say that in this day and age where we're so bombarded with sensory overload, that meditation would be a typical sutric practice. And that's basically the basis of sutra. I would say Christianity and Islam, these are sutric religions. They instantiate the reality principle in a sutric manner, where we're not allowed to just enjoy. And there's a necessity to sutra. I would say that even the basis of spiritual practice is sutra. Now, the problem with sutra is that by just inhibiting our bodies and our libidinal drive, the life force itself, we come up against an impasse. So Tantra is actually about, what if we do not just inhibit the body and deny its libido and repress it, but what if we use this in a certain container with rituals to cultivate even more spiritual maturation by means of what in my paper I call the self-encounter. So basically the triad of the tantric spiritual practice I have in my paper goes like this. And it can either be psychedelic or it can be sexual. But you have a certain intention, an idea about this is going to happen when I'm going to go into that tantric container, or the tantric realm as I call it. Then in that tantric realm, you have the self encounter. You encounter yourself in a way that you've perhaps never encountered yourself in, maybe on the level of the body, maybe in your mind, because psychedelics kind of open up the ego, so you can come into touch with yourself. And the trick, and I would say that the goal is to take this up as a self-encounter and not externalize it when it's negative, which it very much can be, but to take it up as this lesson so you can integrate it in your daily sutric life. Because the tantric realm is not something that we just always go into. And then it's not like I'm for Tantra and I'm against Sutra because Sutra is boring. No, the foundation is Sutra. If you don't have your Sutra in order, Tantra is not for you yet. That's really crucial. Alexander Bard calls this the Bard absolute, and I think it's a great term, that you should be barred from accessing those certain dimensions.
Right. So in regards to bringing in Freud and bringing in, monotheistic religion, Freud with the pleasure principle and the reality principle, and the monotheistic religions as a form of, let's say, sutric foundation. What spaces are explored in Tantra which, say, are not explored in conventional religion or psychoanalytic practice, for example?
Yeah, sex. Very simply, so you can explore it. You can explore the sexual or with psychedelics. And I'm not really familiar with the Eastern traditions. My tantra basically comes from my own kind of secular Western theory, and then what I've experienced at the TNT workshop. So I'll just take a step back here, because the TNT says that there's basically three types of tantra. There's the traditional tantra, which we know from those ancient religions. Then there's neo-tantra, which came up with figures like Osho in the 20th century, and also New Age. You will hear a lot about tantra and New Age. But then there's the new tantra, and the new tantra isn't spiritual, and how many people would say would have an association with what is spiritual. It's very secular. It's very down to earth. You could call it sexual education for adults. So it's a sexual education for adults that actually where you actually learn about your own shame, not just in an abstract manner, but in level 1 workshop. For example, you work with spinal de-armoring, and this is now let me take another step back, since I don't know how familiar people will be with it here. So for men, if they want to get into tantra, they have to start with practicing non-coming, whether it's masturbation or sex. Just abstain from what's called the peak orgasm or the ejaculatory orgasm, but keep being sexually active, and just build up that sexual energy while you're having sex or masturbating. Now, what that allows you to do is, when you build up this sexual energy and you go into the TNT workshop level 1, you can there's this exercise called spinal de-armoring, like I said, and with pressure points on the body, you can actually open up what's called the Kundalini chakra in the East, and this allows you to flow the sexual energy in such a way that you cannot do when your body is armored, when it's kind of tensed up. And this allows you to experience dimensions of sexuality that you can never even imagine how it is like before you go into that. Now, also, you work with femininity and masculinity, especially femininity, because men tend to have a lot of shame about their own feminine side. And this is the femininity masculinity pool is, of course, sexuated in nature, and it's a means by which libido is channeled. So it's a crucial way to work with your own self-identity and with your body. So you have what they call slut night in the TNT workshops, and this is where all men dress up as girls, and all women, they dress up even more sluttily. and this is to get rid of the shame, to enjoy yourself in a different manner, and just open up and release yourself into it, into into the party. So
So,
in level, yeah,
yo, go
yes,
ahead.
yeah.
Well,
So
I was just gonna say that in your description here, it seems like there's a way in which the pleasure principle and the reality principle are shifted into a higher order or a different relation, and that from your description of that practice, and specifically, emphasizing men and the anal de-armoring and
right,
going into the feminine enjoyment, it seems like there's an asymmetry that emerges where people are really being held into a feminine space because the men are dressing up like women and the women are becoming even more women. So
yeah.
is there a way in which we have an asymmetry tending towards the feminine in Tantra?
That's a very good question. I mean, there's many ways in which you can theorize what are masculinity and femininity, and the way that the TNT does is that the masculine is more about presence and space holding, whereas the feminine, like Fanny Norlin also says and does with her women's work, is already kind of there, and you just have to let it be there. You have to have the masculine presence and the masculine space holding, which can contain the feminine, so it can flourish. So I would say, yeah, in such a thing with slut night, it's actually something very funny that the instructors would take more of a maybe more masculine role since they are the space holders there, and really like it's quite surprising how easy it is for many men to go into their feminine persona, and when that happens, they kind of they kind of lose that aspect of, oh, I have to take care of things, I have to space hold. So it can become a little chaotic in that sense. But yeah, it's definitely, TNT is very women friendly, and it's really, I would say that it's it's kind of a radical speculation, but perhaps you can say that tantric sex is about serving the feminine, really, because women deal a lot with tensed up bodies and stress, and of course sexual trauma, which makes them armor up their bodies, and this can actually get stored in the pussy, so they have pain during sex, and this is super common. This is super common. So in level 2, like you've already said, we have the anal de-armoring, which is basically relaxing the sphincter muscle, and also um, coming into contact with penetration for men, and overcoming the shame of, oh, a lot of men, they actually think that anal enjoyment is gay, which is really ridiculous to me, but men actually believe this. um, and for women, something that helps them a lot is the vaginal de-armoring, which is a way, again, that you work with pressure points in the vagina. The person doing it to the woman has to be very present, has to contain a space where she can let out all emotions. And emotions that come out can be differing. She can cry, she can become very angry, she can even kind of laugh about it, or it can be all at once. So it's really a space where all those emotions and tensions that have been stored up in the vagina can be released. And um, well, women not only have pain in the vagina, but also a numbing. And usually how it works is that when she has a numb vagina, that underneath there's a lot of pain, and underneath that is a lot of horniness and pleasure. So if you go for the vaginal de-armoring, women can actually experience like 7 orgasms, a cervical orgasm, or matrix orgasm, a womb orgasm, and these are super intense orgasms that are actually bordering psychedelic, I'd say, and can go on for 20 minutes, something like this. So these are things that open up with tantric spiritual practice. Yeah.
Right. So there is a way in which the knowledges that you're associating with sutra, like again monotheistic religion or psychoanalysis, they seem to be holding a certain frustration of the pleasure principle, let's say, because of the reality principle. Like, for example, in psychoanalysis, you would go because of neuroses, or you would go because of hysteria. Perhaps you would become a monotheist if you were just, in regards to it, let's say a traditional monotheist who believes in an afterlife and a heaven in there's a prohibition in this world, but you're going to get your pleasure in the afterlife. There's a way in which, again, Tantra is sort of wagering that we can get the thing, so to speak, on this side, but it just requires going into the foundational emotions of the drives, right? So what in your experience are some of the dangers of doing this, and what are some of the techniques that have helped you in confronting these drives and potentially opening up a form of enjoyment that most people frankly don't believe is possible in this world?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Well, obviously, the question of sex is never going to be solved. It's an enigma in and for itself, and that's how it's going to stay. You're always going there. It's always either excessive or too little. Uh, so the dangers, I would say, is that, well, if you think about going to a TNT workshop, you have to realize that you will come out a different person, really, and you will have a very much a different relationship to your own sexuality and how you embody that. So it really depends, of course, how deep you go into it. But if you really open yourself up to it completely, then it's very much going to change you. So I think, yeah, the danger would be if you think, oh, I'm going to reconcile sexuality with this. Um, I'm going to, like Alenka Zupancic says, it's fundamentally, sex is about a fundamental negativity. So you're not going to get rid of this with Tantra. That's very important. And I mean, yeah, honestly, I would say with dangers, I would say a non-tantric, pre-tantric sexual life was more dangerous than what I'm doing now. It's really you really cultivate a sexual maturity once you go into it. For example, like I talk about in my paper, um, people, all kinds of emotions come up with sex. So right, if you I mean, that's why sex was so central to Freud, because it was with sex and sexuality that you can see all those infantile drives that are being repressed. So in Tantra, you actually open up the space um, for yourself and others to see. So you can't look away anymore. And that might seem very scary, but again, it's a very loving community. The instructors are extremely good at space holding, and it's a safe environment to do that, so you can learn about it for yourself. But again, like you can have things come up like jealousy or shame or neediness, insecurity. All those kinds of things are going to come up, and uh, yeah, again, I think that why I love TNT so much is that because every day we had a work every day in our workshop, which was 7 days long. Every morning we had a sharing circle, and there was like 50 people, and everyone could get the microphone and speak up about what happened the day before. And I always use this to talk about, maybe frictions that came up, things that I wasn't so sure about, ambiguities. So I would very much encourage everyone to be as honest with it as you can for yourself, so you can bring it into consciousness, which you when you don't have a tantric container like they provide in the TNT. Can you really do this? It really depends on your partner. It also depends on yourself. Yeah. As to the dangers. Yeah.
Okay, so this organization you are working with calls itself the New Tantra, and you've mentioned that already. What makes it new? Is it the context? Is it because it's the 21st century? Is it because it's being done in Europe? Or are there methodological differences from supposedly ancient Tantra? Are there things that are being introduced methodologically that have never been done before? What's your understanding of the new Tantra?
Yeah, good question. I think that what makes the new Tantra special is that it's what I'd call like real Tantra. Because a lot of Tantra these days can be like cuddle workshops. And they call it Tantra because it sounds juicy and interesting, but it's not actually deep spiritual work. It's more of like a new age feel good kind of things. So the new Tantra is totally not that. You don't have to believe anything. You can be very skeptical of what goes down there, but again, they're super down to earth, and they're practitioners, instructors that have really lived it in their own lives. So yeah, the new Tantra, what's Alexa Vartman, the founder of it, called it the new Tantra so she wouldn't be associated with everything that we already associate with Tantra, I believe. That means that the new Tantra kind of has its own, I would say, Tantra for the 21st century, that gets its insight from, science and philosophy and psychoanalysis even. So as far as the methodology goes, they have developed it themselves, and Alexa Vartman has studied and been to Eastern traditions, but I can't really talk about how it's different from those because I haven't experienced those.
Sure. I think the next place I would like to go connected to that is that probably in the last 10 years, it's become popularized Eastern traditions as it relates to like for example, mindfulness is something which is practiced in corporations. Like it's become a part of the culture.
Yeah.
You'll see yoga very much popularized. People, there's entire industries built around yoga clothes and mats and workshops around yoga. Tantra, not so much. The new Tantra is kind of esoteric. It's maybe what you would call a Bard Absolute. Not many people know about it. It's not spread throughout the culture in the West. Probably, I don't think it's spread throughout any culture in a pop type of way. At least I don't think so. And at the same time, we do live in a time, I don't think just in the West, I think globally, where people are not, let's say, psychologically adapting themselves to traditional norms about how sexuality is expressed. But at the same time, we don't really have a deep conscious engagement with the unconscious of sexuality. Do you think that not just the new Tantra, but Tantric-like methodologies could become popularized or more wide scale in the same way that, say, mindfulness or yoga has become large scale?
No, I don't. No, and I also don't think it's desirable. Yes, for sure, there is a market to it, and it's quite a small market. And I mean, especially for us interested in philosophy and spirituality, I think it's definitely worth exploring. But really, Tantra is not about proselytization, and that's also something that has kind of moved me away from politics, and also I would say, uh, certain religions that functions on this idea that I have to get other people into this, because I think the moment you have this desire for the quantity to increase, there's already something wrong with what you're doing. The primary focus should be what's the inner culture and what's the quality of what we're doing.
I
And
totally agree. And
yeah,
I'm not trying to set this up as a we should do this. And I
no, yeah,
totally understand what you're saying on a proselytization level. What I'm trying to get at is something from your paper where you say there is a taboo on sex in our culture. There's a taboo on sexual bodies. The consequence of this is that we have an immature sexuality. We can have
yeah,
neediness, greed, and so forth. And sexuality can be used as a manipulative tool to disrespect others. I think I would also claim that sexuality can be exploited in a neoliberal economic context, in a capitalist context, where people start using their body to make money or
yeah,
use their body in a way that is actually being subservient to certain processes of capitalization, which are turning the sacred into something commodified. For example, so my question is more, could tantra be a useful methodology on a wider scale to help with the processes of um, both removing the taboo of sexuality while at the same time maturing sexuality?
well, yeah, this
Is
is
it,
basic.
is it clear what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah. I know what you're trying to get at, and I think this is also where Freudo-Marxism went totally in the wrong direction. This idea that we can, it's with Freudo-Marxism, it comes up with Marcuse and other figures, and also, also quite some leftist thinkers.
We
This,
shouldn't.
this
We certainly shouldn't make the mistakes of Marcuse.
no, no, and I mean, I think that is Zizek really gets this, that like, sex is not something that you will at once liberate, and then when it's free flowing, it's all right. Tantra is about the realization that this will never be so. It's, maybe you can even compare it to drug legalization, because you realize, okay, people are going to do this. They're going to have their fetishes, they're going to have their perverted little things, but what's actually an intelligent and mature way to contain this and to go about this? So whether you can have some kind of tantric sexual education, which is for everyone, like, honestly, I would think, the way we learn here in the Netherlands, we learn about sexuality as children and is in high school, is totally in this neutered, sterile, uh, supposedly scientific way. Um, but there is this underlying kind of moralism and taboo still about this. Zizek talks about the way it has changed. We have gone from, like, the taboo, which came from Christianity, to this kind of it's open, enjoy yourself, it's all right, express yourself, but still there's caveats, there's unwritten rules and things like this. So yeah, I mean, I would think it's great if you know people like those TNT instructors, or people who have the wisdom, like them, and think seriously about this, to work on a different kind of sexual education, with the basis in psychoanalysis and modern philosophy. But yeah, whether this can be used on a bigger scale, I'm kind of hesitant about it, because there
It's a
can come
difficult question.
consequences which
I
you
mean,
didn't expect.
yeah, but not trying to say, do you have the final answer on this, but just to sort of intuit maybe what are some of the contradictions at work here, and how might we start thinking about this? Like, for example, you're someone who's both exposed yourself to Freud's writings, you've exposed yourself to psychoanalysis. You've also exposed yourself in an embodied way to Tantra. And in my experience, they have sort of different approaches to handling the sexual unconscious, where psychoanalysis will handle it more on the level of free association of the unconscious speech, whereas Tantra will have actual like anal de-armoring and vaginal de-armoring. It's a more direct bodily methodology. So, like, for example, what would be, and there are problems with psychoanalysis as an institution and stuff like that as well. So what do you think is the relationship between, say, for example, a methodology which emphasizes unconscious free association and direct bodily work with sexual energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to hark back to what we previously talked about, I think Tantra will always be for a minority of people, because you got to have a certain type of psyche which is not so rooted in the sutric normativity of society. This is what Alexander Barth calls a shamanic. Psychoanalysis is interesting because I agree with Alexander Barth that you can never institutionalize this on a mass scale, because it requires very particular skills of the psychoanalyst to deal with the free associations of the analysant. So I would say that Tantra and psychoanalysis are actually very similar, insofar as, the end of analysis is when you go through the fantasy. And also, since we don't learn so much about sex outside of the tantric realm, usually, that the tantric realm is also a space where you go through the fantasy. And yeah, free associate.
So the difference is between how you go through the fantasy. Do you go through it through free association, through unconscious speech, or do you go through it by dressing up as a woman, or and de-armoring your bodily drives? I'm assuming, or at least my spontaneous thought points towards there should be some sort of relationship methodologically between these processes, or there could be potentially. Like it would be potentially useful to, after you've gone to a TNT workshop, to couple it with psychoanalysis.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, actually. That you can.
I mean, because from what I've heard in the TNT workshops, after the TNT workshops, you're kind of on your own, and then the people in the TNT workshops will start doing little sex parties or orgies, or but
Yeah.
wouldn't it be perhaps more mature to do a psychoanalysis of the materials that have been emerged?
In the TNT community here, we do have a meetup of the men every few months, and this is only for the men, and of course there's a women's group as well. But this is a kind of space where, after you've gone through TNT, you can be with other men who have gone through the same thing, and you can talk about it. And there's different activities we do, but there's not something like psychoanalysis. No. Well, we have a kind of a circling, so we can talk openly about it.
And why do you think that is? Because one of the core principles of psychoanalysis is that there are barriers to entry on the level of resistances, psychological resistances.
Yeah.
So do you detect psychological resistances to this? Or maybe also another question would be, how do you analyze the speech and the circling? Do you feel like there's a certain maturity, a certain self-realization that emerges after the TNT process that sort of replaces the need for psychoanalysis? Or are there still unconscious frustrations and disturbances which might benefit from psychoanalysis?
Yeah, I think that's this is kind of where we touch upon also the science of spirit, because this is spiritual practice is not something I think kind of ends. I think, that's where it also with psychoanalysis gets a bit iffy. What's really the end of analysis? Because the moment the analysant goes out, he's gonna get all these fantasies again. So should he go back to analysis? Should he be on analysis his whole life? No, of course not. It's ridiculous. But yeah, this is where I think something like
Could I interject here for a moment?
Yeah.
Is that the way I agree with what you're saying here and phrasing here, and it is like I agree with you also that like there are paradoxes about what is the end of analysis and stuff like that. The way I've treated analysis is if there are emotional disturbances in my life related to transference that make my life unlivable, I go to analysis. So the question would be, I guess, on my end is after people have been through the TNT workshops, are there problems of transference which emerge and persist, which could use that as a practical tool?
Transference. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think necessarily there's so much of a problem with it there.
So
But it's also hard to talk about it because it's different for everyone,
Well, sure. But so you're saying that the TNT workshop is an effective methodology for helping people work through issues of transference?
I would say codependency, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
If you're struggling with in a relationship with codependency, there's couples who go to the TNT workshops together, and they go there because they really want to work with, for example, their codependency, and not only this, but also improve their sex lives or deepen their romantic relationship. And yeah, this is a real it's a real it would be a really difficult thing, to go there with a partner for many people. But I think it could help a lot with codependency, because the interesting thing about codependency is that the way we think about sex and relationships is that a lot of the psychological establishment doesn't actually connect the two. And when you read Alenka Zupancic, What is Sex? In the beginning, she talks about a therapist who's totally morally appalled and shocked that the one who's in therapy with her actually talks about his sex life. And she's like, "Oh, this can't happen." And Alenka Zupancic says, like, "Look, this is a huge problem." And for example, with codependency, an issue that can come up is, or like a way that you can see that codependency is happening for men, is actually premature ejaculation. The fact that they can extend their orgasm, their peak orgasm with other sexual partners, but not with their own partner. Like, why is that happening? Psychoanalytically, of course, there's something happening with fantasy right here. This is my intuition. There's something happening, that there is a disconnect between the body and mind, and the person just gets off on their own fantasy. And I think that there's men who have problems with they come too early, or there's men who have problems with getting their penis up, or there's men who have problems with like ever ejaculating, which isn't so much of a problem anymore when you go into tantra. But I think tantra is a means of like investigate, like why actually are you dealing with premature ejaculation, and how can you work bodily to work with that. From my own experience, when I we in TNT they call it a miss, when you have a mistake where you come accidentally where you actually didn't want to, but you got caught up into it. When I actually get a miss in my life, it's because I'm not embodied. It's because there's a disconnect between my mind and my dick, basically, and my body, the base of my body. When I'm embodied, when I'm opened up, when I'm not tense, when I'm really relaxed and present, then I don't have a problem with it. And it has to do with an anal arm ring, for example, or stress or things like this. But also fantasy plays a crucial part in this. Another example is wet dreams. When you have a dream and you ejaculate in your dream, why is that happening? Well, I talked about it with people in the TNT, and this Tantric Gigolo Timo, he explained to me that he had a similar problem, but he started writing down what happened in those dreams. And then the same thing came up in those dreams, and he decided to live it out sexually with other people. And after that, it never occurred anymore. So that's going through the fantasy. So there's this deep relationship between like the orgasm itself and how your penis and nerves function there, and the fantasy structure of your psyche. This is
And
covered because of
living it out, basically.
yeah, and living it out and going through the fantasy. So I know
As
this
opposed to just
but
as opposed to free association.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Like I know these practical things because of TNT, but I can intellectually comprehend it because I've read Freud and some other psychoanalysis.
Sure.
So there's really a deep link here, and that gives us a lot to work with to create a tantra for the 21st century, or at least like a kind of foundation to it.
Okay, well, there's an aspect of your paper where you start playing around with a Hegelian logic of the abstract, the negative, and the concrete, and you apply it to Tantra, specifically where you say there's a 3 steps where there's an abstract intention going to the Tantra.
Yeah.
There's the tantric experience, which could be a sex workshop or it could be a psychedelic experience, which associate with the negative because you're shedding a lot of images, you're figuring out what it is in itself, the abstract intention, that is. And then you have the concrete, which you say is the work of integration. So I guess what I'm trying to point towards with all this, what's the relationship between psychoanalysis and Tantra, is what is the work of integration?
Yeah, the third moment is always a weird moment in Hegelian Dialectics, isn't it? So I think this is a kind of an open question to me. I do know that yes, you have to you go into the tantric realm, you come out of it, and then just like with psychedelics, like the question is, how are you going to take what you experience there to your daily life, which can be boring or stressful, or are all these things like banal. And I think that the trick is really to to take what Hegel read in the foreword of the Phenomenology of Spirit seriously, and that is to not get attached to what you have experienced there in the tantric realm, and kind of uphold this intuitive absolute where A equals A, and I've had those beautiful experiences. So this is exactly why I think Hegel is such a good thinker, to think about the question of integration and the meaning of this.
Right.
Because
I mean,
where do you don't find it so often, that's the problem with Eastern traditions. Please, if someone knows it, please come to me and tell me, but I haven't found anywhere where there's not this worshipping of the intuitive absolute. And this is what I found in Hegel. And in this sense, like Hegel, the man Hegel himself couldn't think Tantra. But Hegel's method, you can apply it to tantric spiritual practice, and I call it like the science of spirit, or Hegelian Tantra. But Hegel is actually a very sutric thinker. when you read the man himself, and not only read, Phenomenology of Spirit and Science of Logic, but also philosophy of religion, philosophy of history, and the lectures on religion. So yeah, I would say it's a great question, and it's open to me what exactly the answer is. I mean, I do think Hegel here becomes something crucial to think about.
Because to me, the work of integration would have to involve handling abyssal differentiation, and
Yeah.
that's a paradox, because like, I haven't been through a TNT workshop, but I've been through several psychedelic ceremonies, and I do have an aversion to, for example, people identifying with the beautiful images that they experience in a psychedelic trip, and then thinking, okay, I've had contact with the absolute, so now that's the primary reality, and my abyssal differentiation is an illusion. I think the opposite is true.
Yeah.
But what if the opposite is true?
Yeah.
What if your abyssal differentiation is now you're really only getting started here?
Yeah.
So I think that in regards to take, for example, like a practical example you've already brought up, like that I could take as a problem of abyssal differentiation is the problem, let's say, of codependency. We could also say that there's a sort of an aversion to commitment and responsibility in a long-term relationship, right? Like we live in a society where there's this emphasis on the problems of codependency, but you could also say there's a problem of commitment and responsibility in a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
So like for example, you could have as many psychedelic visions of the non-dual absolute as you like, and then you have the problem of, again, cheating, polyamory, not feeling loved or recognized or seen, or in your partnership. So, and I feel like these have an irreducible political economic dimension as well. Like that you can't just get out of with let's say an ecstatic de-armoring of the body, or an ecstatic psychedelic vision of and so forth. So I'm just trying to point towards the concrete work of integration and abyssal differentiation, and what tools do we have? How do we think this?
Yeah.
And as a Hegelian Tantra, I think this to me would be Hegelian Tantra.
Yeah. And this is why also I think one way you can avoid this idea that I'm just gonna cling to the intuitive absolute of A equals A and all is fine. That the second moment, so in between the abstract intention and the concrete integration, you have what I call the self-encounter. And according to Hegel, the science of spirit deems the self to be the negative. So that means that the self-encounter is actually an encounter with negativity. And that means that when you have a psychedelic trip or a TNT workshop and you experience a deep negativity, which actually, if you go to a TNT workshop and you take it seriously as a spiritual practice, you will come into contact with dimensions of yourself that you maybe didn't expect were there. You will come up against your boundary, and the difference, the negative of yourself, which is the self. But the trick is to be able to recognize yourself in it. And of course, just what's important here is that the first in level 1, this is why in level 1 of the TNT workshop they have a lot of emphasis on boundaries, on communication, on slowing down. They emphasize that if you don't want to do this, they say that every exercise, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to do this. But if you will do this and you go into it, and negative emotions will come up, then you have to what helped me is with Hegel is to see like, okay, this is the truth. This is a real truth of my being. This abyssal differentiation. which there could be a lot of shame about too, which there in the TNT you work with. And if you actually take this as the crucial moment instead of instead of the ecstatic infinite now, or instead of all the orgasms and the wonderful time that you have, then you also kind of avoid clinging to this intuitive absolute, I believe. And with that, to posit some kind of substantial enjoyment which was lost is always basically a means of self-deception. This is why Zizek says in, I believe it's Hegel in A Wired Brain, he says that the best, if you think about the best sex you ever had in your life, Zizek says that this actually never happened. It's just a retroactive fantasy, and this will always be the case, paradoxically so. This is what the subject does. It posits substances in the past to which it attaches this substantial being where there is no loss. So yeah, to work with the loss coming up in the present in relationship to your own body or your own mind in the tantric realm is really where the real work is. Can you be present to that? Can you stay with that? Can you take that up as a self-mediation, as a relationship of yourself to yourself? And can you do a gesture of self-love and self-acceptance where you can actually take this up into the concrete integration of your being afterwards? Mm-hmm. And this is a continuous work, of course. This is not something you do and then you've done it. No, it's deep in the nervous system, especially when you get to sex. It's all your sexual history is in your nervous system. You are not gonna get that memory out of it just like this. It's
absolutely. Yeah. So maybe let's go deeper into your understanding of the science and spirit, because the science of spirit, because you open up the article with an extensive sort of exploration of Tantra. You go through the level 1, you go through the level 2, and then you point towards the science of spirit, and so what is the science of spirit to you? I know you've already brought up some themes of that, but where does Hegel come into the picture here, as it relates to what we've just talked about, the explicit focus on Tantra?
Yeah, so the science of spirit is a science of what Hegel literally says in the Phenomenology of Spirit. He says it's a science of the consciousness of experience. And this means, he really means that when he says this, because it means that it's a science that you live within. It's a science of your shape of spirit or your shape of consciousness, or basically your determinate notion, which is the whole of the self and the world together as your kind of, you call it like maybe a religion, maybe an ideology, maybe a worldview, but inclusive of it all, both highly personal and kind of how you think globally about things. So in the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel describes the self-contradiction of these shapes of spirit, which are simultaneously their condition of possibility, but in their disavowal, they are a condition of possibility insofar as they are disavowed as a contradiction. But the moment the shape of spirit lives through the realization of its self-contradiction, it will get sublated into the next shape of spirit. So this movement, this becoming of spirit to the ground of the science of spirit, which is absolute knowing, is it's a becoming that happens because of the negative. This is basically what Hegel calls the principle of motion. So in the science, Hegel in the Phenomenology of Spirit describes the coming to be of the science of spirit to the ground of science of spirit. And the ground of the science of spirit is the pure self-recognition in absolute otherness. That's Hegel's words. So it's totally abyssal, this ground of spirit. And this is what I mean with the self-encounter in the tantric realm, is that if you can apply this pure self-recognition in absolute otherness, then you are basically a spirit scientist really living it in an embodied level. And that's what Hegelian Tantra is all about.
Right. So the connection there that I'm thinking is that it's, you know, for someone like, and here I'm talking to the right guy, basically, because you went into this tantric space with already the ideas of what absolute knowing is, you know, the recognition and absolute otherness and stuff. So having that knowledge, having gone through the phenomenology of spirit, would you say that that is the correct philosophical prep material to the embodied experience of Tantra? Is that sort of like the it's like a really pragmatically useful connection?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Read my paper, man. It's great. If
Yeah,
you're watching
I haven't just read your paper. But
yeah, to the viewers.
for everyone listening, definitely, yeah, check
Yeah,
out the paper. Plug for
yeah,
enter the alien.
yeah. Look. I was trying to before I went to the TNT workshop. I was trying to find literature on tantra which would help me with it, and I just couldn't find it. I didn't think the Eastern stuff was. Yeah, I just didn't. It wasn't for me. It wasn't enough for me.
Was it too intuitive, too flowery?
Yeah, it was super flowery. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually, I do. I mean, I
the
do.
lotus flower.
I do actually quote some Eastern spirituality. You know, some Dzogchen philosophy in my paper. But no, I think that you can't really find one place where there's a good intellectual exploration of tantra in a written form, and I think that's where my paper succeeded as a kind of foundation for this. So yeah, it's super idiosyncratic, because the vast amount of people who do tantra don't know about Hegel, and probably the vast amount of people who know about Hegel probably don't care about tantra. But weirdly enough, they go together so well. And
Well, there's
yeah,
something that you quote in your paper. It's a quite famous Hegelian notion where you say, the fear of error is the fear of truth, qua the self as negative. And when you think about, let's say, the sexual space, and here I'd like to actually take it away from just, like, for example, tantric workshops, and just talk
yeah,
about, our experience of sexuality in general. Because I think whether, I would even say, maybe especially in long-term relationships, that in long-term sexual relationships, fear of error is oftentimes why the relationship becomes so frozen, or why there are so many problems which build up, is because the couple doesn't really know how to deal with the fear of error, right?
yeah,
So you try to hide the error. So I think that also what's at stake in a Hegelian Tantra, and I'm just going to bounce this off you to see how you respond, how you feel about this, is that I think a Hegelian Tantra would also help people in general dealing with error and truth in sexual relationships. Like that to me would be where the discursivity should be located. Is that let's let's confront where we feel like failures. Let's confront where things have gone wrong, and let's not be afraid of the truth, and let's be burned by the truth, and hopefully move forward even deeper.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that
totally.
that idea actually, to me, could be Freudo-Marxist, in the sense that it's for libidinal relationships in general.
Yeah, that's
I mean, it requires a lot. It requires a lot of people.
yeah. You have to accept your own symbolic castration. That's a
Yeah,
prerequisite to it.
exactly.
that's that's really a prerequisite to it, and yeah, that's so difficult to do. But I think also, yeah, I'm going to bring TNT here again because they really they really uh, have have an understanding of this, and it's also hard to do with two people on their own, because you can get into this kind of entanglement where there's this there's a certain way you relate to each other, there's a certain way you know each other, and to break through that by just opening yourself up in the symbolically castrating yourself and saying, okay, this is me, it's not actually the idea you have of me. There's more here, and I'm not so sure about what it actually means for you and me and us. Yeah, that is probably one of the most difficult things to do in an intimate relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's to me
because I
yeah, go ahead.
because I because many people they get they come to each other because in the first instance they can superimpose their imaginary fantasy on the other person,
Exactly.
and this
So
is if even I even with friends, I since I've gone to this tantric realm, I've noticed that okay, they had a certain idea about me, and
yeah,
now I don't keep to that idea, and they'd
yeah,
rather lose me than actually
yeah,
lose that idea that they have of me.
exactly,
They want me to they want to constrain me to the mere notion that they have of me, whereas
exactly.
I grow out of it. And yeah, this can be the end of the relationship. So
Exactly. It
yeah,
usually is. Yeah, it
yeah,
usually is. And
yeah,
in my experience, that's the real test of whether you're dealing with someone who has embodied absolute knowing.
yeah,
So in regards to this superimposition of the phantasmatic notion, which is usually, or as a rule, unconscious, at least in part, of course, you have some pre-conscious awareness of it. But, one of the absolute foundations of Hegelian philosophy as it relates as a difference from Kantian philosophy is that the thing in itself is found and refound in this correspondence between object and notion. So you can't just have your internal, usually mostly unconscious, coherent, phantasmatic notion and just project it onto the other and assume there's a correspondence.
yeah,
The
yeah,
correspondence has to be constantly renegotiated and broken apart and renegotiated. So it's almost, and that's, I think, where you get the power of the negative and the power of the of loss.
yeah,
There. So my relationship to what's being described in the tantric workshops, perhaps I've experienced this in the psychedelic ceremony, but it's the sort of inner confrontation with the coherence of your own fantasy and the capacity to then work with the negativity, so to speak. And when I say work with the negativity, it's correspondence between object and notion, which is always a little off, in need of constant dialectical logic. So just, you
yeah.
know, do you think this is, I guess, since you're coming at this as a kind of from the inner circle of the tantric realm, do you think that the people you're around who have been through these workshops, do you think that they naturally start to embody this type of way of being?
Ooh, wow, that's such a difficult question
Well, you're
because
talking to a Hegelian here, so there's going to be some difficult questions.
yeah, yeah. Well, very honestly, I mean, Hegel has this quote in the Phenomenology of Spirit, where he says that spirit is only as deep as it trusts itself to disperse itself and to lose itself in its own explication. So it's an abyssal dive into you don't know what it is. That's basically, uh, what how deep you are going to be. And this was for me like doing the Hegel courses. That was an aspect, but also going to the tantric realm where I didn't expect. I didn't know what was going to come ahead of me, and I just did it this year. I'm gonna see, in 5, 10, 20 years, maybe then I can answer this question properly. To like, what does it
For
actually
sure.
mean, to keep being on this path? Whereas, for other people, um, what I would say is that, from what I've heard from the TNT people in TNT, is that sex is less about an image and more about energy and the body.
Yeah.
So I have really experienced this, where um,
And that
you
and
know,
that would be a technical traversing of the fantasy.
yeah, yeah, and
Technically.
this is the thing. Well, in this day and age, especially, I mean, probably 99% of young men watch porn. So this is how they learn. This is their sexual education. Literally, they learn to get off on an image on the screen,
Yeah.
and then they can't get their dick hard when there's actually when they're actually with a woman, or they have premature ejaculation, or there's other problems. I haven't brought up performance anxiety for men. That's also very much a thing
Huge.
that's important to bring up. But again, this neuro wiring of this image that you learn by watching porn, uh, when you actually go from porn to sex, usually this image breaks. You notice that, wait, there is no correspondence between my imaginary notion and the object, and there's just a symmetry breaking. So yeah, it's very subtle, because once you go into TNT and sex parties, and it's more about body and energy, then it's also what I think Osho would call like a no mind space. You're not really in your head. Actually, your mind can kind of get in the way of uh, living yourself out bodily in the way you want, and just like on a natural, spontaneous way. So I think that it's important to take into account that with with absolute knowing, it's not that you overcome the image, but it's a reconciliation that you're always going to have uh, a certain kind of relationship to the image, which is actually mutable, and you don't know how it can change in the future, and in what radical ways it can change. But like the fantasy of you overcoming, like uh, you cannot get on top of yourself in a neutral position and see, okay, my notion is always going to collapse the moment it really coincides with its object. So I'm just like fine with that. No, like you have to continuously go through that process, live it out, and go through um, the sublation of those notions. Yeah.
Right. Um, and the reason why I bring this up, and why I think it's so important to talk about, is because in my experience with the psychedelic ceremony there and psychedelic communities, there is a way in which they can become, again, tethered to the image. And I think that creates even more problems for them potentially. Whereas in the tantric space, I'd imagine you could also become tethered to the image, in the sense that I've heard that in the tantric communities, there are problems with people who are still like exploiting or there for the wrong reasons, or using it in such a way as that they make the end about, I don't know, getting into as many weird sexual situations as possible, as opposed to, for example, realizing that Tantra isn't even about sex at all.
No, it's not. Yeah.
So do you see these contradictions? Do you see these? How does this play out? Because in my experience with the psychedelic community, it's like, okay, I like the psychedelic ceremony and so forth, but I don't really see the psychedelic community as capable of moving maturely into deeper levels of the notion in this Hegelian way.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I mean, that's there's a rift between religion or spirituality and philosophy, right? And you've kind of
There
tried
is,
to
yeah.
bridge this in your own way.
Sorry?
You've tried to kind of bridge the gap between spirituality, religion, and philosophy in your own way, by seeing if you can take Western philosophy seriously in regards to those spiritual explorations.
Well, I suppose for me, and here I'm just guided by, having really deeply wrestled with the phenomenology of spirit for like 5 years, which is, it seems to me like Hegel's idea is that, and Hegel's a philosopher, right? So like I've had this conversation with Todd McGowan where like he's a little biased towards philosophy, but like, taking that, I accept that. I understand there's limits to philosophy. But Hegel's idea is that, you have the spiritual level, you have the religious level, and you have the level of absolute knowing. And that the level of absolute knowing is where you embody the level of the philosopher. So it's to me, you can't really just become a philosopher by doing psychedelics or having crazy sex or identifying with a monotheistic religion.
Yes, and this is also, you cannot just, Kant made the distinction between learning philosophy and learning to philosophize. Because learning philosophy in academia and just learning, just piling up, accumulating your knowledge of philosophers is not doing philosophy. So
exactly,
what are you doing when you're doing philosophy from a psychoanalytic point of view, and you're not dismissing it like Freud did? In Sex and the Filled Absolute, Zizek says that it's a kind of personal theoretical psychoanalysis. And I think that's where Hegel really succeeds, where he continuously makes you identify with something just to destroy that again. So you go through the fantasy of, okay, this is not it, this is not it, this is not it. And when you found it, like, oh, this is it, absolute knowing, then it turns out that there is not really a kind of substantial object that you can hang on to, but the object was always the subject. Actually,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
So I think that naturally transitions us into your conception of Hegelian Tantra, which I think you do actually a really good job at, which is linking both Hegel and Tantra, probably Hegel on the level of conceptual thought, on philosophy, Tantra on the level of sexual body and sexual energy, in terms of the transmission of the negative to the positive. And you say, okay, on the abstract conceptual level, Hegel is the negative to the positive. You also have Sutra to the Tantra, which is another motion of negative to the positive, where you have the prohibition structure, the renunciation structure, and you have the thing in itself. And I would say you also have the transition from Kant to Hegel, which is another transition from the negative to the positive, because you have Kant's negative dialectic, the antinomies of reason and so forth. and then you have Hegel positivizing that as the thing in itself, kind of thing. So maybe could you go into a little bit about how you conceptualize this relationship and really bringing these forms closer together?
Yeah, this is going to be a continuous work. It's definitely not a definitive account of how I conceptualize these terms, but in TNT they call the means by which we learn what sex and sexuality are, they call it conditioning. It's like the reality principle, and Sutra conditions us, right? Our entire lives, and friends, family, relationships, porn, all of this. And they call the TNT the workshop. That's where you decondition all your conditionings. So yes, you learn things there, but also crucially, first you unlearn things there. You basically shed off your conditioning. And I think this is very similar to Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, where instead of Hegel wanting you to identify with all the knowledge he has accumulated over the years, he wants you to learn many of the presuppositions you had about what thinking is, what spirit is, what consciousness is, and how the notional becoming of how notional becoming actually actualizes. So in this sense, Sutra is a negation, and Tantra is a negation of the negation. It's the negation of Sutra. And
yet contains it.
Yes. Yeah.
Like you say, for example, that Tantra contains pathos in a logical way.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's basically how I use Alexander Barth's theory of narratology, that you have logos, pathos, and mythos. Logos being philosophy, mythos being I would say first pathos being raw, dry sex and violence, and mythos being kind of the story you tell yourself because you are trying to mediate like the logical, egoic, conscious way you think about this, and then also what's happening unconscious. But I say in the paper that Tantric Hegel is what Hegel does is like he is not just logos. He isn't just this Aristotelian law of non-contradiction where A equals A, but he mediates logos in a pathical way. And I say that what happens in between shapes of spirit is actually a disruption, which is pathic, which is negative, and that's also.
And then you just become this. The logic of this disruption.
Yeah. Yeah. And Hegelian Tantra is so Tantric Hegel. What he does is he mediates logos in a pathical way. And what Hegelian Tantra is that you're mediating pathos in a logical way. So it's the obverse. You're actually you're actually creating a container for those pathical drives instead of trying to push them down. And mythos is basically the impossibility of both as their oscillation, as like the negative gap between them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of way I've tried to rethink logos, mythos, and pathos by Alexander Barth by applying the terms on their own. Like what if you say there's such a thing as logical pathos? Yeah. Right. So in Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel has this quote that he says the power of spirit is not this is not a positivity, but is the power to face and tarry with the negative. And he says that this is a magical power which converts it into being. So that's the negation of the negation, right? It's not just the negative, but it's the negative redoubled as a conversion into being. That's how I understand that term. At least that's what the power of spirit is.
So I think bridging from that, you have a section towards the end of your paper where you talk about the non-relation. The non-relation here is an important concept in Lacanian psychoanalysis. It's an important concept in Alenka Zupancic's work, What is Sex? How do you sort of make sense of the non-relationship in your Hegelian Tantra point of view?
Yeah. So what ordinary consciousness does, or a Kantian would do, would basically have a myth about the relationship, see this as a kind of spontaneous genesis, and externalize and reject fundamental negativities that would pop up as contingent and things that I can just set aside because they're deviations from the norm, which is the fact that she is the one and he or she is the soulmate or whatever. So in Lacan actually understands the non-relationship, the fundamental negativity, as being primary to its efficacy, which is infused by the imaginary, symbolic, and symptomatic registers, which kind of positivizes them into an image or something like this. So in What is Sex, Alenka says that the key to sexuality, where do we find this? What is this enigma sex? And she says that the key to sexuality is actually in speech. And I think that really already in the first chapter of the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel explains this very well with sense certainty. That sense certainty, what it does, it says my particular meaning, or like the way I feel about it, is how I know that I have a relationship to absolute truth. And then you ask it, what? Okay, so tell to me what is it, and it says now, or it says this, and then but what is now? Like when I say now, I know what I mean. I have a particular meaning to that, but you don't know if I mean this hour, this minute, just this moment. And so when I have to explain it further what that means, I have to use universal language. And we are stuck with the universal. This is kind of what Eastern traditions, or like philosophies which are tied to an intuitive absolute reject. That's why Hegel gets it out of the window immediately and says no, like we have to tarry with the universality of conceptualization. And this is also why sex, the key of sexuality, is fundamentally in speech. You can't just separate sex from speech. It's always symbolically mediated. So this is basically the start of how I understand the non-relation. And yeah,
I have a question there, because to me that brings us back around to what I was trying to point at earlier in relationship to psychoanalysis and Tantra as methodologies, because psychoanalysis keeps sexuality on the level of the speech of the unconscious, and Tantra takes you into sort of a bodily mediation. So, what do you think's going on here? Like, what do you think's the difference in methodological approach? And to me, if we keep sort of the importance of the idea that sex is mediated, the key to sex is mediated on the level of speech,
yeah,
that at least raises red flags to me as it relates to just throwing inexperienced people into these strange bodily mediations without a psychoanalytic dimension to it.
yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean, and I do.
Because you still have to deal with the speech of the unconscious. I mean, and like you said, it's not going to stop. And the environment we're in is actually, I think, increasingly dangerous as it relates to sexual energy because of capitalist exploitation, because of the destruction of all sutras as a ground, because of the absence of real large-scale monotheistic religions. Like that we don't have a societal sutra.
No, indeed. No.
We have capitalism.
Yeah. 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 That's capitalism is definitely not sutric insofar as there's a.
So then there's the
everywhere.
there's the libidinal energy of the body. There's the unconscious speech which cannot be closed, and we have potential capitalist enclosure.
Yeah.
Which to me, this is a frightening mixture.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're entering the alien.
That's the negative.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This is where we should think the non-relation, maybe.
Yeah. Insofar as the non-relation goes, I do think it's good to keep that in mind when you're doing tantric spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. Because of course there's people going there with having ideas that they will once and for all solve their sexual problems, and it's like gonna be the thing, the solution, the big solution to it all. But that's not how it works, and that's never how it will work. And that's why just assuming that the fundamental negativity of the non-relationship is primary to its secondary manifestation. Yeah.
All right. So towards the end of your paper, you have a section titled "Edging the Absolute." Maybe I should just let you go into that. What is you? My connection here is that you go through the steps of Tantra systematically. You explain level 1, you explain level 2, you did it in the real, then you connect it to Hegel, you connect it to absolute knowing, you went through the Phenomenology of Spirit course. All of these things are concrete mediations of yourself, and then you end the paper with the idea of edging the absolute. So what does that say? What are you trying to leave people with?
Yeah, edging the absolute. So the absolute is not something that you will once get to by it's not something that you will get to at a later stage or is removed from us, but it's here with us right now. And that's basically, edging, of course, is when you prolong your sexual activity and don't have an orgasm. And orgasm here would actually, the idea is that, as if the peak orgasm is the absolute. That's the misconception. The peak orgasm isn't the absolute. It's everything that happens around it, which is already edging the absolute. That's basically the idea. And this is in Alexa Vartman's 50 Misconceptions in Sex. She actually says the same thing, and she says that science. She uses some scientific study and says that, look, it's actually scientifically proven that in the sexual activity, we might think that we're gonna enjoy the orgasm the most, but we enjoy the surplus enjoyment to it the most. What goes around it, from flirting, insinuations to.
I can reveal from my own personal experience that to me, I experience the orgasm as almost a disappointment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
like the prolongation of the thing.
Yeah,
is the thing.
Yeah, that's edging the absolute.
That's edging the absolute.
Okay. That's what Hegelian Tantra is all about. Yeah.
So we go into the strange. You say we go into the strange. We go into the alien. We go into the disturbing. We go into the destructive, and we find the core of the self.
Yeah.
This is what in the paper you sort of
Yeah. This
this
is
is
the
idea you sort of
yeah.
conclude with almost.
Yeah. And there's no, when we talk about the core of the self uh, in this kind of Zizekian tradition, it's not no like authentic revelation of the beautiful person that you are actually behind all the masks which you finally shed off. No, it's pure negativity. It's self-related negativity. That's what it is. And of course, not to play down all the wonderful moments that you can have by breaking through shame and things like this. Uh, but yeah, the attachment, I think that the main takeaway from not only my paper, but this conversation, that actually the negativity you experience is more formative for your abyssal singular differentiation than all the ecstatic moments which you retroactively posit as substantial, and I want to cling to it and I want to go to it in the
Yeah.
future and I want to get rid of all these concepts because they confuse me and I can't recognize myself in it. No, you have to go into that part and stay with that. And I think that both Tantra and Hegel have helped me so much to confront myself with this dimension. Yeah.
Right. So you said you went into Hegel because originally of your interest in politics and Marxism, right?
Yeah.
With communism.
Yeah.
And there's an idea at the end of the absolute knowing chapter, and you sort of talk about it in the very end of your paper, where you say, absolute knowing is a communing with your own otherness, a restless superseding, and so forth, and that this is where the indestructibility of spirit lies. So when you think about that in the perspective of Marxism, communism, what ideas come to mind? Because there's this idea of this communing, but the communing that's going on in Hegel is different than like a embodied communion, I would say.
Yeah. I
So, like, for example, the exact quote you have is communing with one's own otherness as a restless superseding, that indestructibility of spirit lies.
Yeah.
Just trying
I
to bring it full circle in regards to, like, you went into Hegel because of the you did the disappointment or the sort of the disillusionment of
Yeah.
Marxism and political communing.
Yeah. 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 That is super interesting, and I do think that I didn't look the way I didn't leave communism because I thought that I just suddenly rejected the ideals. No, I saw more and more that, wait a second, those people in communist activism and the way it's being embodied in the world, there's such an incongruency between activism and the actual ideas of Marx and Lenin. And I basically wanted to be more communist than communist. And I do think that like if you actually think about communism and you know about psychoanalysis, you have to think about libido, and you have to think about the I think I could accept a rethinking of communism with the Sutra and Tantra divide. But if you don't have a Sutra and Tantra divide also in your religion or philosophy, it's very hard to really make good distinctions between and to really have a good foundation of what you're doing. So the fundamental problem with communism, again, there's this problem that there is a phantasmatic ideal, and then there's the disembodied acting out of that ideal, which there's like a massive gap in between. And that gap became more clear and clear to me. And I kind of kept the what you can call the communist spirit in me alive and went into other philosophy and kind of rejected the way that people were going about this. So in that sense, I looked for communism in Tantra, and again, communists themselves, they have no differentiation in the ideal of what they want to bring forth.
Mhm.
There's no differentiation in communism, and this is the whole problem. It's just it's just imaginary.
Well, I remember
Yeah.
I went through a phase of being obsessed by communism, and in that, and I knew that while I was in it as well, is that it was difficult / impossible to imagine the positivization of the actual communist space.
Yeah.
Like I can't. It's an impossible image. I think that's actually where I like really fell into and loved Zizek's Less Than Nothing, because it was like, well, this is an impossible image.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do think that Zizek is a bit too much of a 20th century thinker for me, and I think this is where we agree. This is a point where we disagree. That
Well, you're more 21st century than me. I'm old. I'm dying
yes.
soon. You're gonna carry on beyond me. I'm not. Don't even worry about it.
Yeah. No, but I do think
Stick a fork in me already.
I do. Look, you make a differentiation between conservative metaphysics of Sloterdijk and then Zizek with his progressive, more metaphysics. And Zizek lured me in because he said, I'm a communist, I want to think this, I want to take the 20th century seriously. And I do think he does an amazing job at it. It's better than anyone else from what I've seen in his books. But if you read, for example, Sex and the Field Absolute, he says that what Aristotle does is basically argue from a kind of master position, whereas the only fact that there really is basically the ontology of dialectical materialism in the Zizekian sense. But I don't think this really is necessarily tied up with his leftist ideas. I think it's more like a lure into his ontology. It's like, oh, I'm a leftist, and then you start reading it, and it's kind of ambiguous, and then there's his ontology. So I think for the 21st century now, we should think Sutra and Tantra divide within spirituality and religion, because political ideologies, I don't think that they can do it. From what I've seen post-Enlightenment, whether it's fascism, whether it's communism, whether it's liberal democracy, they cannot think the Sutra and Tantra divide. So
Yeah.
that's what Zizek also misses in his own thinking, because he doesn't think that. Yeah.
No, it's super, super difficult to think all of this stuff. And that's why I wanted to actually have a little conversation about contemporary society. I mean, to me, if there's a positive, so like my understanding of Zizek's philosophy is that he's saying that the natural concrete byproduct of Hegelianism was Marxism, and that we need to go back to the core of Hegel to see what the mistake was in Marx's interpretation and derivation. It's kind of like you can, like in mathematics, you can disagree with the fundamental principles in mathematics, but you kind of have to accept the derivations of certain foundational principles. Like, you derive these mathematical truths from this foundational principle, but you can go back to the foundational principle and change the foundational principle, and you can derive a different mathematics. So, like, for example, in the same way, Hegel is the foundational principle of Marxism, and Marxism is a derivation, but we have to go back to Hegel to derive some different idea. And what Zizek concludes is that the foundational principle is self-relating negativity and the communing with otherness. And so what he derives from that is what he calls disaster communism. So, like, we shouldn't think about communism as a positive utopian ideal. We should think about communism as a necessary political form given global catastrophe. And I actually think that's an interesting way to think.
Yeah.
Like, for example, we're not just going to have a global communal body that agrees on a political order, but we will have global catastrophes, which require us to get to coordinate.
Yeah. I mean, I get this. But to harp back what I said, like every activist will acknowledge this, and many leftist activists talk about the problem of the ideal of communism and then the gap between that and the action. And you can see this in Marx already. And this is that if you read Das Kapital, it's of course probably the best starting point to think capitalism, and it's a very good description of capitalism. But when you get to okay, but what do we actually do, and you look into Marx himself, I think that in the critique of the Gotha program, he has his most positive view of what should happen, and this is a pamphlet of 50 pages. So imagine this: you have Das Kapital, 3 volumes. I think it's like 1,500 pages. It's like so thick of descriptive theory, leftist, very rigorous. And then you get to the question of what's the prescription, what do you actually do, and you get a flimsy critique of a German Workers' Party with some theoretical, oh no, this is not exactly like this because I theorize it like this, and there's not really a positive vision there. So this kind of gap has always been there in the leftist project. And look,
I
and
just want
that,
to go ahead.
just to hark back to Zizek, yes, okay, disaster communism, but then also he's standing there, years ago in New York on the square, and he's like interested in Syriza and Maduro, and Chavez and things like this, and I think that you can see this gap in Zizek himself, and this is, I think, the basis of what Alexander Barth calls right-wing Marxism, is that you take the description that has come from the leftist tradition, you take it seriously, especially since it has been grounded in psychoanalysis and Hegel. But this moralist prescription, you're kind of skeptical about this, and you're careful about this.
But what's the moralist prescription?
The moralist prescription is that, I would say that the moralist prescription is the fact that there's a perverted self-instrumentalization of the other, which says, okay, because of the substance of the prescription, we are now guaranteed to know that what we are doing, and we have to carry it out, like a self-conscious proletariat which knows what it's doing to bring communism here. Now I know Zizek critiques it, and that's why I think Zizek is a great bridge to right-wing Marxism and to get rid of this prescription. But yeah, you get in a lot of, I think,
I don't know if it's about. I don't know.
I
just want to say I don't know if it's about left and right wing, because
it's about is and ought. It's about ontology and ethics. That's basically the question. To the
I agree with that. But it's not about left and right wing. So I agree it's about ontology and ethics. So for example, when it comes to the idea of disaster communism, I don't think it's left or right, and I don't think, and Zizek explicitly critiques left-wing activists and says that self-revolutionizing capital is more revolutionary today than revolutionary activism. Yeah. Like the activists are just idiots, basically. But the idea that he develops in his latest work is that revolutionary politics, which the activists certainly don't meet this standard, should almost inherit the tradition of Christology. That is the sort of the martyrdom of like a Che Guevara, or like someone who sacrifices themselves in relationship to an impossible situation, which is the exact opposite of a positive political vision. It's basically, and it's the opposite of sort of self-instrumentalizing perversion. It's basically saying it's sacrifice, basically.
Yeah. This is where Girard becomes interesting, right? Because then we're talking about the scapegoat and sacrifice, and this is I've never read Girard, but I know there's probably some things there to think here.
I think let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to your paper, and let's bring it back to you. So, Hegelian Tantra. You came at Hegelian Tantra through sort of a dissatisfaction with Marxism, an introduction to Hegelian philosophy, and an exposure to sort of new tantric forms of thought. Where are you now? I know you've mentioned Kantian Tantra. I know you've gone through the Nietzsche course as well.
Yeah.
Where are you're also preparing another paper on Nietzsche. So yeah, where are you in relationship to where you were when this paper started to emerge?
So now I've I would say I've kind of taking a bit of a break from tantra and the spiritual practice, because when you go into something like this, you have to you have to be patient and you have to take time and let it unfold and not be hasty with it. So in regards to philosophy, right now I'm trying to think the end game of Nietzsche and Hegel together, which I claim you can find in what Nietzsche calls the child, and Hegel also calls the child, or actually the absolute idea. There's massive, super interesting agreements and slight differences here that I haven't seen properly thought as of yet. And let's take men's work, for example. What is men's work? When you go into that's the idea that you must have an initiation rite to go from child, to have certain constraints, certain kind of sutric practices, so you can be a mature man who can take on the world and work for his own path. Well, beyond this is becoming children again. And basically my thought is that I claim that Jesus Christ, Hegel, and Nietzsche all agree on this. And the means to go from natural child, which is the child of the child that we were literally, to spirit child, is a period of negativity of the camel and the lion, like Nietzsche talks about. And yeah, I'm trying to think this basically.
Yeah,
and I
it's a
think
difficult thing to
eventually
think.
I will be able to connect it to tantra, but it's so humongous. It's kind of
Yeah.
Trying to
It's
think on it.
interesting though. It's interesting too in regards to thinking, like, for example, Zizek's Christology and the sacrifice in terms of disaster communism is that Nietzsche, and thus spoke Zarathustra, spends the entire fourth part thinking about, well, starting with the honey sacrifice and then talking about a sacrifice which he interprets as a bestowing. So he's like trying to mediate even the concept of sacrifice, to basically saying, how can I call this sacrifice what was bestowed to me? Like he's saying, like the way I interpret it is like even the notion of sacrifice is still almost like coming from a bitterness.
Yeah.
Like
It's
I'm
about
just
sacrificing the sacrifice.
Yeah. It's
How do you
interesting.
sacrifice the sacrifice and become a self-turning wheel?
Yeah.
On its own accord, in its own singular way, for itself.
Yeah.
And
what is the in itself for itself? That's always the interesting question to me.
yeah. What's nature to the absolute idea? Yeah. Right. I mean, that's for Hegel says that the absolute idea is kind of like a game where you have distinctions. It makes its own distinctions and then it overcomes it again and stuff like this. But then, of course, you have to try it: nature, idea, and then logic.
Yeah, Nietzsche is such this idea too. Like Nietzsche is such an interest, especially through Zarathustra, is such an interesting idea of overcoming his own distinctions he's positing.
Yeah.
So is there any final? So you've taken us through both Tantra and Hegel. I think you explained yourself really well. You explained your paper really well. For anyone who's super interested in this, definitely check out Enter the Alien. Are there any like global ideas or a global message that you would like to end with?
Global
Thinking
message.
about the
Yeah, you can.
conversation.
I mean, if you're interested, you can check out my website and my YouTube channel. And yeah, this is.
I'll leave links to descriptions of both.
Yeah, spirit is a bone.
Yeah,
That's it.
you just want to say spirit is a bone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a good infinite judgment to affirm in this.
All right then. Well, that was Dimitri, everyone. Thanks for coming on, Dimitri.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Check out Enter the Alien.